Hundreds of pro- and anti-immigration demonstrators have faced off in Glasgow in rival protests over asylum policy. Each side was kept apart by significant police presence as tensions rose.
It's December 2025, and the UK is in the middle of a full-blown public revolt. Not a viral outrage, not a one-day protest with cardboard signs and hashtags, but a sprawling, sustained movement with real-world impact. Over 100,000 people have taken to the streets across 15 cities. And no, they are not protesting about some fringe issue or niche political scandal. This is about survival, about choosing between heating your home or feeding your family. Welcome to the heat or eat revolution. With tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now, it's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. In London alone, more than 50,000 marched. The capital was gridlocked. Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Newcastle, they all followed suit. Trains were disrupted, traffic frozen, and public life interrupted by a level of organized defiance the country hasn't seen in years. These weren't random flare-ups. This was a coordinated, nationwide uprising, rooted in something that's been boiling for years but finally reached a breaking point. Over 8.9 million households are now facing fuel poverty. That's not a typo. Almost 9 million families, by the end of 2025, can't afford to heat their homes properly. Energy bills have soared over 40% higher than what they were before 2021. Meanwhile, wages? Flatlined. People are colder, poorer, and angrier. And this winter, they've had enough. The protests started small. Candlelight vigils. Community groups posting online about outrageous gas bills. Some signs. Some chants. But within weeks, it escalated. What began as a scattered reaction turned into a wave. Union groups stepped in. Regional organizers began syncing up. The marches got bigger, more visible, more disruptive, and more persistent. The message was blunt. People don't just want help, they want accountability. They want long-term solutions. Because this wasn't just about one bad winter or one failed policy. This was a result of years of government neglect, years of energy mismanagement, wage stagnation, and short-term fixes that only made long-term problems worse. Initially, the government tried to play it cool. Some officials downplayed the numbers. Others promised that help was coming. But that help, it arrived late and half-baked. Chancellor Rachel Reeves eventually reinstated winter fuel payments for pensioners. That was supposed to be the pressure valve, a sign that the government was listening. But the protests didn't stop, not even close. Because by then, I know things feel really heavy in the UK right now. There's a lot of division and noise on the streets, but I want this channel to be a place where we can come together. If you want to be part of a supportive community, please subscribe. And like this video to show some love to everyone feeling anxious about the state of things right now. Stay safe out there, everyone. The movement had evolved. The outrage was no longer just about energy bills or frozen pensioners. It was about something bigger. Credibility, trust, the sense that those in charge had not only failed to anticipate a crisis, but were scrambling to patch it up when it was already too late. And here's the twist. This wasn't your typical flash-in-the-pan outrage. The heat or eat movement didn't peak and fade like so many protests before it. It didn't burn out after one big march. It transformed into something more dangerous for the government, something long-lasting. Instead of explosions, this movement chose endurance. Weekly demonstrations, local meetups, continuous pressure. The strategy wasn't about noise, it was about staying power, about embedding the protest into daily life until the system was forced to notice. And it worked. The political timeline shifted. Parliament couldn't just wait this one out. Ministers were suddenly reacting to a protest that refused to die down. It didn't rely on shock tactics or violence. That was the brilliance of it. This was a slow-drip rebellion. Less riot, more routine disruption. But over time, that rhythm became its strength. People didn't need to scream. They just needed to show up. Again, and again, and again. The result? A government completely on the back foot. Every policy announcement became a response to pressure. Every reversal felt like a band-aid. Because when your population no longer believes you can prevent crises, when they only expect you to react after the damage is done, that's not just a failure in leadership. That's a credibility collapse. The reinstatement of fuel payments? A nice gesture, sure, but it didn't fix the core problem. It didn't rebuild the trust that had already eroded. And it certainly didn't undo years of economic neglect that left millions choosing between hot meals or warm homes. This wasn't just about fixing energy bills. It became a demand for systemic change, a call for proactive governance instead of endless fire drills. The people didn't just want temporary relief. They wanted to know it wouldn't get this bad again. And no one in power could convincingly promise that. The government's slow response also exposed a bigger issue, the inability, or unwillingness, to act before the tipping point. By the time politicians started paying attention, the anger had calcified. Protesters weren't just marching anymore. They were building a new kind of protest culture, one based on persistence, not passion, on calculation, not chaos, and that scared the establishment. You've seen the headlines, but the atmosphere down here is completely different. Subscribe so you don't miss the raw footage I'm releasing later this week, and like this video to help push this unfiltered reporting up the algorithm. Because this new approach was effective. It showed that protests don't need to explode to be powerful. They just need to last. To grind down the system over time until change becomes inevitable. That's a different kind of threat, and one much harder to dismiss. This was a real revelation of the heat or eat movement, that economic distress doesn't just vanish when the headlines do. It sticks, it grows, it embeds itself into the public psyche, into daily life. And once it's there, it changes how people see their leaders, possibly for good. The government's reactive posture also sent a dangerous message, that problems need to become unbearable before anyone acts, that you have to freeze before they notice you're cold. For millions of Brits, that lesson hit hard, and it's not one they'll forget come election time. More than anything, this crisis revealed how deeply structural the UK's energy issues have become. We're not talking about a bad quarter or a post-pandemic bump. These are embedded, long-term problems rooted in bad infrastructure, stagnant wages, and years of kicking can down the road. And the public finally called time on it. By 2025, people were no longer interested in waiting for seasonal handouts. They wanted answers, plans, reforms, because the real problem wasn't just bills, it was a total absence of a long-term fix. And that absence, it cost the government more than approval ratings. It cost them their credibility. At this point, any government response that doesn't include structural reform is seen as too little, too late. It's not just about financial relief. It's about transparency, responsibility, and the ability to anticipate problems before they metastasize into national crises. That's the lesson Britain learned the hard way. The protests may have started with heating bills, but they ended up revealing something much bigger, a country that no longer trusts its leaders to lead, a population that's not waiting for permission to push back, and a government that's finally realizing how dangerous prolonged silence can be. As winter drags on, so do the protests. They become a fixture of the national mood, a symbol of what happens when people feel unheard for too long. And whether or not the government can recover from that kind of damage, that remains to be seen. Because the real issue isn't whether this protest succeeded, it's what it revealed. That trust, once broken, doesn't come back with one policy tweak or one reverse decision. It has to be earned, over time, with action, with foresight, and with honesty. And right now, that's in very short supply. If you're following this movement, or you're part of it, you already know what's at stake. With tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now, it's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. And if you're watching from the sidelines thinking, this can't go on forever, well, that's exactly what the government thought, and they were wrong. So what do you think? Has this protest changed British politics for good? Or is this just the beginning of a much bigger reckoning? Hit the comments and let us know. And if you want to keep up with more stories like this, where public pressure turns into political fallout, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because this winter revolt, it's far from over. It's now become impossible to separate daily life in Britain from the undercurrent of unrest. This isn't just about turning up for one weekend of chants and banners. This is a slow-burning fire that refuses to die. Week after week, people show up. Pensioners, parents with strollers, teachers, nurses, bus drivers, even students who've never known a Britain that wasn't in crisis. They are not asking for miracles. They are asking not to freeze to death in their homes. And that's what makes it all the more infuriating. Because this movement didn't emerge out of nowhere. It was decades in the making. The heat or eat slogan is brutally simple, but the issues behind it, they're anything but. We're talking about an energy system built on unstable foundations, a cost of living crisis that's been worsening year after year, and a government that's consistently failed to treat warning signs like, well, warnings. The fact that fuel poverty ballooned to nearly 9 million households in one of the world's richest countries, that's not an accident. That's the result of strategic neglect. It's the product of delaying infrastructure investment, downplaying inflation, and treating energy security like a spreadsheet problem instead of a human one. And now, the people caught in the middle are refusing to carry that burden in silence. Every time Downing Street tries to reassure the public, it backfires, because reassurance without action just feels like gaslighting. Ministers talk about temporary relief while families juggle between heating and dinner. They announce emergency aid while ignoring the question of why this became an emergency in the first place. That kind of messaging doesn't calm people down. It infuriates them. This is where the protest messaging really shines. Heat or eat isn't just catchy, it's emotionally undeniable. It breaks through all the political fog and gets straight to the point. Do you want to stay warm, or do you want to stay fed? Pick one. That's a kind of binary that cuts across party lines, class divisions, and ideological debates. It forces people to look at the issue in human terms, not just policy terms. I know things feel really heavy in the UK right now. There's a lot of division and noise on the streets, but I want this channel to be a place where we can come together. If you want to be part of a supportive community, please subscribe. And like this video to show some love to everyone feeling anxious about the state of things right now. Stay safe out there, everyone. And clearly, it worked. Because this isn't just a protest anymore. It's a reckoning. You can see it in how the protests have evolved. They are no longer just marches, they are movements, with regional networks, weekly schedules, and sustained involvement from unions, local councils, and even church groups. They built momentum by refusing to let the outrage fade. And in a political landscape where short attention spans usually win, that's a radical shift. They are not yelling louder, they are staying longer. And that staying power? It's the real threat, because politicians know how to weather scandal. They know how to ride out a bad headline or make a flashy promise when the cameras roll. But a protest that refuses to go away quietly, one that embeds itself into the national rhythm, that forces a different kind of response. No more empty platitudes. No more photo ops. If you want to stop this kind of movement, you have to address the root causes. And right now, that means fundamentally rethinking how the country deals with economic vulnerability. But here's the kicker. The government wasn't ready for any of this. They thought this winter would be like the last. Cold, yes. Politically tense, sure. But manageable. They expected the usual spikes of public anger followed by resignation. A protest, a trending topic, and then silence. That's a pattern they've relied on for years. But this time, the public broke the cycle. Instead of waiting for policy crumbs, they demanded a seat at the table. Instead of a one-off demonstration, they created a drumbeat. And that rhythm, it's still going. And it's not just about energy anymore. That's the other thing the government didn't see coming. When people start marching for heat, they quickly start talking about everything else. Food prices, rent, wages, healthcare. Because none of this happens in a vacuum. It's all connected. If you can't afford heat, chances are you're also struggling with groceries, with bills, with basic survival. The crisis has layers, and now they're all on display. So what happens when your citizens stop trusting that the state can meet their most basic needs? You get what we're seeing now, a public that isn't just protesting policies, but the entire approach to governance. People don't just want fixes, they want foresight. They want leaders who can prevent a crisis, not just clean up after one. But the more reactive the government becomes, the more obvious it is that they are not in control. And that perception, it's deadly. Because once the public sees that pressure works, you've seen the headlines, but the atmosphere down here is completely different. Subscribe so you don't miss the raw footage I'm releasing later this week, and like this video to help push this unfiltered reporting up the algorithm. That their sustained defiance can move the system. There's no putting that genie back in the bottle. This winter may have started with fuel poverty, but it's ending with a shift in how Britain protests. We're no longer in the age of one-day outrage. We've entered a new era, long-game resistance. No flash mobs. No viral campaigns that disappear in 48 hours. This is about staying power. It's about wearing the system down, not blowing it up. And it's already working. Just look at how political timelines are shifting. Policies that were impossible 3 months ago are suddenly back on the table. Emergency aid packages are being cobbled together. And ministers who previously dismissed a movement are now falling over themselves to show empathy. Not because they want to, but because they have to. But here's the danger. When change only comes under extreme pressure, it teaches people to stop trusting quiet negotiation. It rewards public disruption, not dialogue. And that dynamic? It erodes the core of democratic governance. Because if protest becomes the only language the government understands, what does that say about the state of leadership? At some point, the system has to catch up, not just with policies, but with expectations, with the reality that people are no longer willing to suffer in silence. They've seen what's possible when they act together, and they're not going back. The protest will end eventually. The marches will quiet down. But the memory of this winter, it'll linger. In Parliament, in the press, in every household that shivered through it, and in every future protest that builds on the tactics learned here. This wasn't just a winter revolt. It was a masterclass in endurance. A signal to future leaders that the public isn't here for performative concern. They want proactive solutions. They want leaders who show up before the crisis hits, not just after the cameras arrive. So now the real question is, what comes next? Will the government learn from this and restructure its approach? Or will it continue treating economic pain as a seasonal inconvenience, only reacting when the streets fill up? Because if it's the latter, well, we've already seen what happens. And next time, the pressure might not be so patient. It's now late December, and the protests haven't faded. They become routine. They are not just events anymore. They are habits. You finish work. You bundle up. You go march. People show up not because they expect instant change, but because not showing up feels like surrender. That's how deep this goes. And here's what's wild. This entire movement built itself without any dramatic flashpoint. There wasn't a single shocking event that tipped everything over. No massive blackout, no sudden policy gaffe on live TV. With tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now, it's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. Just pressure. Constant, grinding pressure. The kind that chips away at the government's composure bit by bit. Because that's what makes this revolt so different. It didn't need a spark to catch fire. It was already smoldering. While officials scrambled to manage the optics, offering fuel vouchers here, a revised aid plan there, protesters were out in the cold, literally and politically. They saw those gestures for what they were, reactive PR moves. Quick patches on a leaking dam. And people have learned to spot that from a mile away. When you've been told for years to be patient, to wait for the budget, to trust that relief is coming, it becomes very clear when the system's promises are just stole tactics. The public stopped buying it. They started organizing instead. And this time, they brought endurance. You can see the shift in public language. Phrases like fuel poverty and energy insecurity went from being niche policy terms to common household phrases. Everyone suddenly knew someone who couldn't afford to keep the heating on. It wasn't theoretical anymore. It was personal. That's how solidarity forms. Not through slogans, but shared suffering. And still, the government didn't anticipate the scale of this. By the time they restored the winter fuel payments for pensioners, the damage had already been done. That move wasn't seen as leadership. It was seen as panic, a reactive scramble to placate one demographic while the rest of the country continued to freeze. The public clocked that instantly. The protest didn't let up because the problem wasn't just financial anymore. It was emotional, psychological, structural. People didn't just want warmth. They wanted acknowledgement that the system had failed them. And here's the uncomfortable truth. They were right. Because if we're being honest, this whole disaster wasn't some unpredictable storm. It was a slow, visible collapse. Fuel prices have been rising steadily since the early 2020s. Inflation outpaced wage growth year after year. Benefit systems lagged behind real costs. Infrastructure went underfunded. And instead of fixing it, leadership kicked the can down the road. This winter was just a breaking point. And the scary part? People have been warning about this for years. Experts, advocacy groups, local councils, everyone saw this coming, except, apparently, the very people elected to prevent it, which is why the protests are about more than energy bills now. They are about a growing fear that the government can no longer manage reality, that it exists in a feedback loop of denial, reacting only when the consequences are unavoidable and public. And once the public sees that, it changes everything. Because the second you believe your government only listens when you protest, you start planning protests differently, not as emotional responses, but as strategic tools. That's exactly what we're seeing now. These demonstrations are organized, disciplined, and calculated. The mood isn't explosive, it's relentless. That's a much bigger threat to political stability, because the system knows how to handle a scandal. It can spin headlines, issue apologies, reshuffle ministers. But a quiet, determined public that shows up every weekend for months, that doesn't give the news cycle a break. That forces uncomfortable questions to stay on the agenda, that's political quicksand. Every week that passes without a comprehensive plan, without a long-term fix, adds more weight to that pressure. And let's be clear, the public is no longer asking for temporary aid. They want a strategy, a roadmap, not just to survive this winter, but to avoid being back here next year. That's the message behind every march, every banner, every speech outside Parliament. Stop reacting. Start planning. But the government, boxing by its own delays, is stuck playing defense. They can't move forward without first admitting how badly they miscalculated. And that kind of political honesty? Rare. Risky. Potentially career-ending. So instead, we get vague timelines. Committee proposals. Promises to review energy pricing structures. All while people still can't afford to turn the radiators on. What's more disturbing is how normalized this has become. How many people now see winter suffering as just another part of life. Like potholes, like train delays, like waiting 6 hours at A&E. That creeping resignation is exactly what these protests are trying to fight. Because the minute people accept that their government can't, or won't, keep them warm during winter, it's over. That's not democracy. That's managed decline. And yet, there's still no meaningful structural reform on the table. No radical shift in how energy is priced, regulated, or subsidized. Just more of the same. Temporary measures, short-term grants, and empty reassurances that things will improve in the next quarter. Quarterly optimism. That's what passes for leadership now. But the people in the streets? They've moved past hope. They're working with facts. And the fact is, it's taken mass unrest to get even the bare minimum of a response. Which leaves us with a haunting question. What happens when people realize even protest might not be enough? Because there's another layer to this, one that isn't being talked about enough. Trust, not just in energy companies or policymakers, but in democracy itself. When people believe their only option is to freeze quietly or march endlessly, something bigger breaks. It's not just about warmth anymore. It's about belonging, about feeling like you have a place in the system you pay into. And if that feeling disappears, it doesn't come back easily. Trust is slow to build, fast to vanish. And right now, it's on life support. This is the part where some commentators start warning about radicalization or civil disobedience. But that's missing the point. The real radical idea here isn't chaos, it's persistence. Showing up, staying angry, but staying organized. It's that persistence that's shifting the ground beneath Westminster. Because the truth is, these protests have already won something. They've exposed just how reactive and fragile the political response has become. They've forced issues onto the table that leaders hope to avoid until election season. They've made it clear that public silence is no longer a given. That alone is a victory. But the bigger battle, the one for lasting change, that's still ahead. It'll take more than marches. It'll take policy reform, regulatory overhaul, real investment in infrastructure, and, most of all, leadership that stops waiting for crises to act. So as we head into a new year, here's the question. Will the government finally wake up, or will they keep patching leaks until the whole system floods? Because winter is still here. The cold hasn't let up, and neither have the people. They are marching through frost, holding signs in the wind, handing out thermoses of soup, knocking on doors to make sure neighbors are okay, building mutual aid networks where the state has gone silent. This is solidarity in its rawest form. Not pretty, not polished, but powerful, and it's not going anywhere. So if you're watching this unfold from the sidelines, now's the time to pay attention. Because what's happening in Britain right now isn't just a protest, it's a warning. A warning about what happens when the people are left to fend for themselves. A warning about how easily trust can slip through a government's fingers. And a warning that next time, the public might not settle for showing up in the cold. They might start demanding the heat back, on their terms. The calendar might say it's December 2025, but outside, it feels like something older, something colder. Not just the weather, but the mood. The silence from Westminster has become deafening, and the public's patience? That ran out about 8.9 million households ago. At this point, even the government's most loyal supporters are struggling to justify what's happening. No spin, no media statement, no softly worded report can mask the fact that Britain has walked straight into a crisis it saw coming for years. And people are still freezing. The marches haven't stopped. They've matured. What started as spontaneous outrage has evolved into something more sophisticated. There are neighborhood coordination groups, rotating protest routes, and live-stream town halls. The same people that were told they were just making noise have now set the national agenda. From kitchen tables to parliament chambers, everyone's talking about the same thing: heat, hunger, and who's to blame. And the answer to that last question? It's not even controversial anymore. Even former insiders are starting to whisper what protesters have been yelling for weeks. This didn't need to happen. Fuel poverty at this scale was avoidable. But instead of investing in long-term solutions, better insulation, smarter subsidies, restructured tariffs, the government tried to patch the cracks with one-off payments and vague winter resilience plans. Those policies didn't just fail to fix the problem. They made it obvious that the government had no real plan, just reactions. And every reaction came too late. So now, the public has stopped waiting. They've filled the vacuum with their own infrastructure. Community heating banks have popped up, public libraries staying open late to keep people warm, churches converting back rooms into temporary warming shelters, mutual aid groups delivering hot meals to families who can't afford to boil pasta. This isn't charity, it's survival. And it's happening outside the state. That's what makes this moment so volatile. Because when the state stops functioning as a safety net and people are forced to replace it themselves, something fundamental breaks. Not just trust, but purpose. Why pay taxes into a system that can't protect you from the cold? Why believe in the legitimacy of a government that only responds when it's publicly humiliated? The people marching through Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, they've already answered that question with their feet. This isn't symbolic resistance anymore. It's a referendum on what government is for. And here's a twist. This revolt isn't even especially loud. There are no burning bins, no smashed shop fronts, no police clashes dominating headlines. It's quiet, determined. It's the sound of boots on pavement, week after week. The kind of resistance that slips under the radar until suddenly it doesn't, because persistence has become its own form of power. Every week, more people join. And not because they think marching will fix everything tomorrow. They show up because not showing up feels like complicity. When you know your neighbors are choosing between switching on the heat and buying food, you stop pretending things are fine. That shared struggle has bred a kind of unity the government didn't account for. Political divides have blurred. This isn't a left vs right moment. It's a basic human dignity moment. It's about the right to live in your own home without fear of frostbite. That cuts across ideology. And that's why it's still growing. No one's asking for luxuries. Just the essentials. Warmth, food, stability. But even those are being treated like political bargaining chips. That's where the government miscalculated most, assuming they could dial down the outrage with targeted relief. Like flipping a switch. They missed the point entirely. The point is, people are tired of switches, of one-time payments, of seasonal concern. They want change. Structural, serious, long-term change. They want to know that next winter won't be a copy-paste of this one. That their children won't have to sleep in coats and scarves. That their parents won't be rationing heat with kitchen timers. That their own lives might be measured by something other than electricity meters and supermarket receipts. But the government keeps pretending this is temporary. Spoiler, it's not. The structural flaws in Britain's energy system, underinvestment, deregulated pricing, inefficient infrastructure, aren't new. They've just been ignored, pushed aside in favor of short-term political wins and flashy announcements with no real follow-through. And now, the bill has come due. And it's not just a monetary one, it's a credibility debt. That's what makes the heat-to-eat protest so powerful. They've turned government neglect into a moral crisis, into a daily reminder that leadership is about more than damage control. It's about foresight, anticipation. And when those things are missing, people stop believing. What we're witnessing is a slow-motion collapse of political trust. You can't see it in dramatic headlines or breaking news alerts. You see it in quiet acts of defiance. A pensioner refusing to accept another delayed payment. A student holding up a "No More Cold Lies" sign at their university. A single mother handing out protest flyers instead of waiting for another empty press release. That's how trust dies, not with a bang, but with a shrug. And once it's gone, it takes more than a policy reversal to bring it back. You can't restore faith with a press conference. You rebuild it by doing what should have been done months ago, showing up before it's too late. That's why this winter revolt is so significant. It's not just about economic pain. It's about how that pain exposes a government's inability to govern. Because leadership isn't about scrambling to act when millions are already in crisis. It's about making sure they never get there in the first place. Instead, what Britain got was delay, deflection, and then, when the backlash hit, desperation. As if freezing homes were just a PR problem. As if people wouldn't notice that their suffering had become seasonal. They noticed, and they acted. The marches will keep going. The pressure will keep building. Because the public now knows they can shift the political timeline. That waiting quietly leads to nothing, but showing up relentlessly, that forces change. Even if it's slow, even if it's partial, even if it's not enough. They've already proven that endurance can be louder than outrage. And that's the real legacy of this winter. Not just a protest, but the culture shift they represent. A shift away from silence, away from passive acceptance, toward a future where people don't just vote, they organize. So if you're in power and you're still betting on public fatigue, think again. The old model, wait it out, weather the storm, it doesn't work anymore. Not when the storm is the people. And not when they've learned how to be their own weather system. So tell us, what needs to change? What's the one reform that could stop this from happening again? Is it energy policy? Wage growth? Accountability? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let your voice be part of this. And if you've been following this story, if you feel like what's happening in Britain right now matters, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because this isn't the moment. It's a mirror. And the reflection it's showing us, it's cold, it's clear, and it's not going away.